Hello everyone, and welcome to today's session of the lecture series. My name is Katharina, my pronouns are she, her, and I will be your host again. We are streaming live from our Düsseldorf studio, and for those who don't know what the lecture series is, it's an educational series where we are focusing on a game development topic each time. We will have a presentation and a Q&A in the end. So you can ask all your questions related to the topic after the presentation, because when you are writing them in the chat during the presentation, I tend to oversee them because we have a rather lively chat, which is great. Today we are focusing on the topic of UI and UX design, but we have had a lot of great sessions in the past. The link to the website was in the chat already. Maybe it will be posted again. You can find more information and all the VODs there. So today I have Silvia Uyoke with me, who is Senior UI Artist in Düsseldorf, and she will give you a very interesting insight into her job and what's important when it comes to a good designing of UI and UX. And if you're ready, let's go.
Thank you, Katarina. So as Katarina mentioned, I'm going to talk today about UI design. So I would like to start today's presentation with an introduction to what is UX and UI. Then we're gonna talk about the UI design process, and we are also gonna discuss professional roles in UI UX in the games industry. At the end of the presentation, I'm gonna talk about skills and tools for UI designers. There will be at the end a Q&A session where I'll be answering your questions. So let's start with what is UX and UI. UX stands for user experience. When we talk about user experience, we talk about how a user interacts with a product, or in this case, how a player interacts with a game. In a game, the overall user experience is not only limited to the UI or the user interface. It also includes the controls, the navigation, animations, sounds, and other aspects of the game. It is important to create a good user experience so players are interested and motivated in continue playing a game. So what does a UX designer do? The goal of a UX designer is to design functional and accessible and an enjoyable game experience for the player. The idea is to make sure players understand how to interact with a game, and also to remove and reduce barriers that might cause frustration or confusion for players. So let's try to summarize a little bit what are the responsibilities of a UX designer. The first one is about research and analysis. So to start the design process, the idea is first to understand what we're making. So in this sense, UX designers need to align first with game design to understand the vision. And then they need to look at what are their target users. So it is important for UX designers to understand who are the users they're designing for, what are their needs, what are their motivations, so they can create an experience that is meaningful for these players. At the end of the research process, UX designers will be able to identify design goals, and also they will be able to anticipate potential problems that players might face in the game experience. Then we have, after research, the planning and design phase. So now it's time to make a plan. We use the user research, and in here we can start defining priorities. UX designers can think about what information is relevant for players, when they can present this information to players, and also how it's going to be the navigation of the game. So in this planning phase, the UX designers will create user flows and wireframes in order to map out the navigation of the game and organize the content structure of a feature. After preparing these designs, UX designers need to prototype and test them with real users. So in order to make sure the proposals are working, UX designers need to test with players and gather feedback. This feedback will help UX designers to identify what problems are there in the experiences of users with the game, and also to identify improvements for then continue iterating. UX design is about critical thinking guided by UX design is about problem solving guided by critical thinking. So this is why it's important to collect information about that can support the design decisions you are making. So on the other hand, we have UI, which stands for user interface. A user interface is the visual structure that contains all important information that players use to interact with the game. This user interface tells the players about what they have achieved in the game, or what is their current process, and they also present information that can help players to make decisions during gameplay. For example, if you see a health bar in a game, this health bar will provide information about the remaining health of a player, which then the player can use to decide whether they have to heal or they can continue attacking in a game. So this user interface can be presented in 4 different ways in games. The first one is non-diegetic UI. This is the most typical type of UI we normally encounter in games, so with normal buttons and menus. In this type of UI, we see the UI elements existing outside of the game world. So they are presented as overlays that are separated from the game world, and they're only visible to the player, but not to the playable characters. Then we have diegetic UI. This type of UI is a bit more immersive, because in this case, the UI elements are located inside of the game world. There's no separation, which creates the illusion that the UI elements and the playable characters are in the same place. This type of UI, both players and playable characters are able to see it. The third type is a spatial UI. In a spatial UI, we can see the UI elements in the game space, but they're not visible for the characters. They're only visible for the player. This type of UI is very common in building games. For example, in this image, you can see in the landscape a grid that tells player where they can place buildings in this game. And finally, the fourth type of UI visual representation is meta UI. So this type of UI is not present as a physical object in the game world, but it conveys information about the player status. In this case, for example, in Rainbow Six, you get damage by an enemy, and then this is signaled to the player as with blood splatters and motion blur, which has a level of intensity, but it's not intrusive to gameplay. These different types of presentation of UI in games have different purposes, and they also create the unique experiences for players. So let's talk about the UI designer role. The goal of a UI designer is to design an intuitive, visually appealing game user interface. So this means that UI designers have an emphasis on the presenting the information in a way that is easy for players to understand, and also to make it look interesting and attractive for players. We can summarize the responsibilities of a UI designer in 3 points. The first one is defining the style and creating rules. The second one is guiding players' attention. And the third one is design, test, and polish. So let's talk a little bit more into detail about the first one, which is define and create rules. In order to develop an attractive visual style of the user interface, UI designers need to consider the type of game they're making, the setting of the game, the players that are going to play this game, and the platform they're designing for. So the goal is to make sure the visual style of the UI matches the personality of the game, and also to create a branding that is recognizable by the players. UI designers use typography, color, iconography, and other decorative elements to reinforce visual themes of the game. So, for example, if there's a horror game, a UI designer might use a darker color palette. Maybe they can use in the user interface some grunge textures to convey the dark themes of a horror game. In contrast, when designing fantasy game, the color palette might be brighter, and the decorative elements might be, for example, ornaments, or they can be, real-life materials like wood or paper. So, after defining the style of the game, UI designers need to create visual rules to be able to keep consistency in the visual UI elements. This means, for example, that when we choose a typography, we have to define how titles, subtitles, or the text in a body of text is gonna look by establishing specific font styles and also assigning in which sizes are gonna be presented in the screen. In addition, UI designers have to make sure that interactive and non-interactive elements are differentiated by players. This is done by choosing, for example, in the color palette, highlight colors to draw attention to elements that are selected in the screen, and also to look at the rules of how the buttons are gonna appear, for example, when they are disabled, when they are on idle, or when they are selected. So, yeah, this is an example of how would you keep consistency of different visual elements. Then the second responsibility is guiding players' attention. The idea here is to make sure that UI designers consider how they organize the UI elements in the screen. We have to establish a visual hierarchy to make sure players can separate important information from secondary information. And we do this by, for example, the use of size. Bigger elements in the screen appear as more important than smaller elements. Or, for example, color. High contrasting colors that draw attention instantly to players. And in comparison, low contrasting colors are not as eye-catchy. For example, in this screen, we can see that the bigger elements are the elements that, for example, in the top navigation bar, we have the operator's tab selected. So in comparison to the other tabs in the bar, this one has a bigger text and also has a highlight color underneath. Also, we see in the list of buttons, the button that is currently selected has a high contrasting color, which is blue, with a cyan underline. And you can see also that there's a difference in size. The selected button appears bigger than the buttons that are not currently selected. So when thinking about layout and composition, we're also thinking about organizing information in a way that is easy for players also to read. So we think about the order in which we place these elements in the screen. From top to bottom, we go from the most general information to the most specific information. And for example, in the Western culture, a common reading pattern is also from left to right. So you can see in the screen that the most commonly used interactive elements are placed either in the top left corner or in the left side of the screen. Then we have design, test, and polish. This is when we put on practice and we apply the rules that we have defined for the UI elements. And also we make things look pretty and polish them. So we can see in this example how we create when we design. We're also looking at making sure how the screen looks in motion. Also, in the design phase, we also have to think about how the UI behaves when the players interact with them. And also, this has to be tested to make sure that this is conveyed in a clear way to players. So, when talking about UI and UX, there's a lot of confusion. Although these terms are not synonyms, they are not easy to separate from each other. So my job as a UI designer, I need to make things look good, but also I need to avoid causing frustration for players when they interact with a user interface. Both for UX and UI designers, it is important to consider accessibility in the design process. So our goal is to make sure we create an enjoyable experience for our users, and also to be able to remove barriers for these users. For this, we need to be aware that among our players, there are people that have a range of impairments that might be, for example, visual, auditory, motion, or cognitive disabilities. Designing with disability in mind is a means to make sure that we avoid introducing unnecessary barriers for our players. And this is something that benefits all of the players, not only the players with disabilities. So, for example, in a game, when we consider people that might have hearing impairments, when we support subtitles, the players with hearing impairments can enjoy and access the dialogue of a game. But this also is appreciated by all the other players. And for example, when we talk about the visual impairments, it is a good practice to provide the information in a readable font size and a readable font style. We want to make sure that the information is legible at all times. And for this, it is also important to make sure there's a good contrast between the text and the background. There's also the considerations about color blindness. Some of the players might not be able to distinguish specific colors. For example, when looking at red and green, they might not see a difference between these colors. There are different types of color blindness, but it is important to make sure that when we're displaying essential information to players, we are not relying only on color, and that we have other channels where we can convey this information. For example, we can show warnings, in red, but we can also show them with icons or with different shapes or patterns or animations or sounds to make sure that this information is accessible to all of our players. So that was the introduction about UI UX. In this part, I'm going to focus on the UI design process since it is my expertise. In here, we can take a look at how we go from start to release of a feature. So the first step in the process is the briefing. So in here, we receive a description of the design goals based on the research from UX and game design. This briefing is where we align with our colleagues, the UX designers in the team or game designers, to make sure we understand what problems we are trying to solve, what is important to present to players, what is a nice to have. The second part of the design process is research and ideation. So after we know what we want to do, then we have to figure out how we're gonna do it. In this step is where we gather ideas and inspiration for deciding how we're gonna accomplish the design goals. So this can be done by, for example, collaborating with our teammates and doing brainstorming sessions, or we can also, on the visual design side, gather references for visual inspiration in the form of mood boards. We also want to make sure we look in the game at what existing rules and conventions are available. Is there a style guide? Do we already have rules of how to present UI elements in the game? Is there available iconography? And if we already have some iconography in the game, we want to make sure we have a visual consistency with this. So we gather these references to make sure when we're designing, for example, a new icon, we are keeping a similar shape language in the design. So the next step is low fidelity design. So after we know what we want to do and how we plan to do it, it's time to start developing these ideas. So the low fidelity design goal is to focus on quick iteration. We want to make sure we can provide different solutions to achieve the goals we want to achieve, but we want to do it without investing a lot of time in this process. So for this, we do quick mock-ups. For example, in wireframes, we can use gray boxes and placeholders to organize how we want to structure the information in a screen. So after being able to provide different variations of the solutions we want to provide, we can look at how these are working, test them either with users or with our colleagues and select the stronger proposals. The next step is to work on high-fidelity mockups. So in here we take the selected proposals from the low-fidelity design part of the process, and in here we want to make sure we can get as close as how things are gonna look in the game. In here we want to polish our ideas and present them with the visual guidelines we have already established in the game, and also make sure these are pixel perfect, and we can provide iterations, but working in high-fidelity mockups is going to be more time-consuming than working on low-fidelity mockups. Apart from mockups, in this part, we can also look at how we want to make the UI animate in the game. The motion design part of this process also takes some iteration, but yeah, the idea is to make sure we can fine-tune how we can fine-tune the timing and also the order in which things are being animated in a screen. Finally, after we are happy with our mockups and we're happy with our animations, we can create the final assets that will be integrated into the game. So the next step is implementation. This is when we take our assets that we have created and we try to recreate these in the engine. So we recreate the layouts, we also recreate the animations, and we also assign a logic to them. So if we have a button, we have to assign the logic of how the button states to make sure we support how they appear visually when they are selected or not selected, and if there's anything being triggered by that button, we also make sure that visually we can recreate the changes. After implementation, we can play test, so we can test in the engine how the UI works. Then we will encounter bugs, which is part of the process, and we'll also go back to the engine to polish these bugs and fine-tune other details we might encounter in the process. After all of this, then it's time for release. So it's important to know that this is not a linear process. In the UI design process, we have a lot of iterations, and we have different steps in which we have to test our ideas and gather feedback to look at what improvements we can do in our designs. So UI design is a team effort. We are not making decisions based on our personal opinion. We are not making decisions of how things are working for us. But we also have to look at the different expertise in the team that can help us get the better result. So in this case, at the beginning of the UI design process, we collaborate closely with UX designers, with game designers. Then when we are producing the high-fidelity mockups, we are collaborating more closely with art direction. And at the end of the process, when we are looking at implementation, we are collaborating more with programmers and QA. So yeah, it takes a lot of people to make sure our designs are working as we intended to work. So that's for the UI design process. As you might have seen, there's a lot of different roles, even within UI and UX. And there's a lot of overlap and a lot of confusion because there are different titles that might mean like different things for different people, but let's try to make a little bit sense of this. So we can consider UI and UX as a spectrum. So in this design process, we have different areas where different roles might specialize. This also depends on the size of a team. A smaller team won't have as many specialists as a bigger team. So in the first part of the spectrum, we have research. So in here we can find user researchers, which will be focusing on user testing, for example, user research and testing. Then we have UX design, which is not solely focused on research. Then we have here also how we apply the research into the design. So UX designers will prepare also proposals for screen flows and wireframes and prototypes. Then we have, when we get closer to design, there's quite a bit of overlap between UX, UI designer and UI designer. But the idea here is to understand that a UI designer's role is more focused on the visual aspects of the user interface than a UX designer. A UI designer will prepare, for example, low fidelity mockups or high fidelity mockups, but they're like focused on the end result of this process. They also can create how final assets will look in the game. Then we move more towards the art part of the roles, and you can find in here UI artist. This role has a stronger emphasis on the visual design part, like for example, defining the visual style of a UI, and they can, for example, work on the high fidelity mockups of a user interface, and they might even like prepare animations or even start working on integration of this UI in the engine. Then, when we get closer to implementation, we have UI technical artist. In this type of role, they're not focused so much on preparing mockups, but they will collaborate with UI designers or UI artists in order to take these mockups and recreate their proposals in the game engine. So this is what I talk about recreating UI layouts, recreating animations in the engine, and also implementing the logic of how they will look like when interacting with them. Finally, we have the UI programmer. UI programmer is solely focused on the logic side of the UI. They're not preparing the research, they're not doing designs, and they're also not creating assets or high fidelity mockups. But they will make sure to connect the UI with the logic of the game. So now that we understand a little bit more about the different roles within UI and UX in the games industry, I wanted to also discuss the skills and tools, in particular for UI designers. So when we look at the skills, something that is very important for a UI designer is to have some knowledge about graphic design. This is where we get like the fundamentals about how to use typography, how to use color, how to use how to create iconography, and how to do layouts and make the compositions to be appealing for players in the UI screens. Apart from that, there's also interesting for UI designers to have knowledge about motion design. We want to make sure our UIs, our user interface, moves in a way that is appealing for players. So it is interesting for us to learn how to do this, to get the timing right, and also to guide the player's attention through the motion of the UI. Also, we have we also need to know about wireframing and prototyping. As I mentioned before, it's not only about the part where we work on the high fidelity mockups, but we also have to provide solutions in low fidelity to provide different approaches and be able to do them fast and not wait until we have invested a lot of time to have an approach that is working for us. Also, as I mentioned before, accessibility is relevant both for UX designers and UI designers. We want to be able to reach a wide amount of players, and we want to make sure we are aware of how to make this experience accessible, what type of barriers we can avoid including in the game. For UI designers, it's also interesting to have some technical knowledge of how to integrate the UI in an engine. This is important because having the knowledge about how to work in an engine, we understand what are the limitations that we have when making our designs, and we can also already anticipate these problems and provide solutions. So we can create high quality designs that are working in the tools we have. And finally, it's very important to have communication skills and to be a good collaborator. As I mentioned, the design process is a team effort, and we want to be able to transmit our ideas to our teammates, and we want to be able also to receive the feedback from our colleagues to be able to provide even a better design. So that's for skills. And then when it comes to tools, we can start by looking into design software. For example, Photoshop and Illustrator are really helpful for preparing our mockups. So in Photoshop, we can do illustrations. We can also prepare high quality assets. And in Illustrator, which is more focused on vector design, it's also good for creating, for example, icons. We can see. We can start with any of these design software and start creating interesting visuals. For motion design, After Effects is a really helpful tool. We can look at how some elements can be animated, and also explore with VFX how to make these animations even more interesting. For wireframing and prototyping, we can work with Figma. Figma is a really user-friendly tool where we can easily create low-fidelity mockups. We can also update these mockups and with the assets as we are designing them, and we can prototype as well. What is interesting from Figma is that we can collaborate with our teammates. So our projects are available for our colleagues, and we can easily share them and iterate on the ideas together. In addition to Figma, Adobe XD also is a tool that is helpful for creating low fidelity design proposals. It has also options for UX prototyping and preparing wireframes and screen flows. Sorry. So when it comes to collaboration, I find Miro really helpful. I think it's really interesting to be able to break down what we're trying to do and gather also the most important information we want to focus on. For example, also if we have visual references, we can use a Miro board and have them there in the same place where we are also we're also exploring in our designs how to create the solutions. And finally, as I mentioned before, we need to have some technical knowledge how a game is done. It's interesting for UI designers to look at, for example, commercial engines like Unreal Engine and Unity to be able to integrate UI in there and understand how is the process and how assets can be prepared and assign a logic to them. So this is my presentation, and I hope it was insightful. And if you have any questions, this is the time for listening to them, and I'll do my best for answering the questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Sylvia. Maybe you want to have a sip of your water. Yes, thank you very much for this insightful presentation on UI design, UX design, UI art. We just heard there are a lot of names floating around, and they all mean something different. But I hope we were able to give you a good overview on the whole spectrum of this game development area. We can now open the Q&A. So if you have any questions related to the topics that were just presented, you can write them in the chat now. And yes, maybe before we get some questions in the chat, I have some questions. So what is the most fun part of your job for you? What's the part that you are enjoying the most?
Yeah, so what I like a lot about UI is that for me is problem solving, but it's focused on like the creative part of it. So for me it's really fun to be able to translate these problems into visual solutions, and I like a lot that in my role I can combine different areas that I am interested about. For example, I studied graphic design, and I also had when I started working, I worked as a VFX artist, and I am able to combine these different things that are interesting for me, how graphic design and motion design, but also look at how users are interacting with the user interface.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I just thought that someone was dropping the exact same question in the chat, so sorry for for being that quick, but we answered your question, so I think that's the main part. We have another question. I think you touched upon this briefly, but how do you guys maintain the overall consistency of the design? So from the gameplay to the main screen, what problems do you face while doing so?
Yeah, so that is really important for us. So we want to make sure we keep consistency first, because we want to be able to, for players, to already be familiar with the user interface. We don't want to introduce unnecessary elements in the UI if there's already something that we have already introduced in the game. But also, for the sake of implementation, it's really good to reuse things that you have already created. So when we create these rules, we try to make sure they can work in different contexts. So when it comes to the challenge part of it, for example, in Rainbow Six, it's a big game that has been live for, I think we're in year 9.
For quite some time.
Yeah. So this means that we deal at the same time with legacy UI that has been implemented to the game a while ago, and while also looking at the fresh stuff that we are presenting to players. So in this case, it takes an effort both from UI and UX designers to look at what's available in the game and see, when there are inconsistencies, we use the seasonal updates to see how we can fix some of these inconsistencies. But also sometimes when we're introducing new stuff, we want to make sure that it is at a good point in the game. So we want to make sure that we do this in a way that is digestible for the players.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, what is the most important part in a portfolio for UI UX to get a job?
As I mentioned, it depends on what is your actual focus, because I think a UX portfolio is going to look very different from a UI portfolio. There's an overlap, so I guess you can have a little bit of both. But for UI design, you're gonna have a more visual portfolio. It's gonna be more about how you create, for example, the visual style of a personal project. It can be I use this color palette. I use this typography. I created with these elements together visual identity for a project that is presented, for example, in a title screen, or you can look at different screens of a game. You don't have to do all the screens that can be present in a game, but you can select a few that might be interesting, for example, an inventory, or you can look at the heads-up display or HUD in the in-game of screen. So in this sense, you want to focus for a UI design portfolio on visual pieces, and you want to also show a little bit about the process of how to you reach to those results. When it also, if you are interested in motion design, you can prepare videos of how the UI is gonna look in motion. When it comes to UX design, portfolios might be more about analyzing problems. So you can look at, let's say, the existing user interface of a game, and you can say, okay, I want to redesign it. So you can analyze what problems you encounter with the existing UI, and you can look at the user personas. You can see what needs users have in this type of games, and then you can identify how to solve these problems. But it's more of analytic description of getting information of how to make improvements to the experience.
Okay, thank you. The next question is concentrating on engines. Which engine workflow do you prefer, or which engine workflows do you prefer to use while making UI? And what's your favorite part of each engine? I think for this, maybe you have experience with Unity or Unreal, because for the most of our games we use the in-house engines, but maybe you can talk about the others.
Yeah, I did work when I was studying in university with Unity, but here at Ubisoft we have our in-house engines. Yeah. What I really like is visual scripting. I think I really enjoy in the engine we're using that UI designers are able to implement the logic of the UI. And we don't have to know about programming, but we can add states to the screens and the UI elements. And I hope that answers your question.
If not, then maybe just drop another question, in a follow-up question in the chat. Which part of game development are you most excited about? So, for example, open world environment, etc. So, what's your favorite part?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes. Which part of game development? So, which part of the game are you most excited about? So, for example, open world environment, etc.
Games in general, or
I think for which part of the game are you most enjoying to do the UI for? Like for which environment or?
Yeah. So to be honest, I don't necessarily have a preference. I really like being able to provide like different solutions to different parts of the game. I don't know. I think all of the different parts of the game have different challenges, and I appreciate these different challenges. Sometimes it's about how to make, for example, if there's progression of a player, how to make sure players are rewarded with this progression. So you make sure they receive nice animations for celebrating what they have accomplished in the game. Sometimes it's about looking at how to make organize the information in a way that is not too cluttered. So you don't want to overwhelm the users with all of the information they might see. It's important to identify how to reduce the amount of information and just presenting what is relevant for them. I can just say like there are different challenges and they're really interesting.
Yeah, thank you very much. The next question is, how flexible is the adaptation of the UI for different platforms, so from console to PC, for example?
This is really important for UI designers, but it really depends on the type of game we're making and the tools we have available for us. For example, in Rainbow, we already have a pipeline where in the engine, the aspect ratio is already like the aspect ratio is already supported when we are designing our screens, so we don't have to manually like set up breaking points for the UI or support different types of layouts. Depends on the tools. It's also quite challenging, for example, if you're doing mobile UI, because you have different aspect ratios in mobile devices. There's not like a fixed screen in phones or tablets. And in there, you really want to make sure this UI is responsive.
Okay, thank you. The next question, is it important to know how to do UI in Engine? Or the programming of the UI?
Yeah, so programming is not in your responsibilities, but I think it's an added bonus to be aware of the technical side of implementing the UI, because it gives you an understanding of what can you do and how you can do this because we want to make sure what we're designing is something that we can achieve in the game engine. So yeah, I would say it is always appreciated when you're interviewing, because already indicates that you know more about the process, and also it will help you collaborating better when you work with programmers.
Okay. The next question is, how do you decide which information is displayed in the head-up display and which should be accessed manually?
So in the heads-up display, you have to display crucial information for gameplay. So things that players need to be able to see at all times. But yeah, like it depends on the type of game you're making. It's not the same to look at a first-person shooter where you have a lot of action happening all the time. So you really don't want to be intrusive to the gameplay. So you have to find ways to reduce the amount of information you're displaying to the player. But in comparison, in a building game, you have a lot of information about what can you build, the resources you have, the different materials you have available. So yeah, it really depends on the type of game you're designing.
Thank you. The next one is a personal question again. What was the project that you had the most fun with?
The project. So I do have a lot of fun in Rainbow, but I have been working in different parts of the game. So I would say that in Rainbow in particular, I'm really interested in what we're working on right now. I don't think we can say a lot. But yeah, I hope players can appreciate the feature we're working on.
Okay. Thank you. Then on to the next question. So for a studio like Ubisoft, there will be high standards when it comes to design. So do you make more versions and iterate the design until it reaches the standard? How much iterations usually does it take?
Sorry, come again?
So how many iterations do you have for the UX design, for the UI, to reach the standard that we have in the big studio like Ubisoft?
It's not a fixed amount of iterations. So basically, you want to make sure you are providing a design that is answering the goals that we have, but it's not introducing big problems for the players in the user experience. Yeah, we need a lot of iteration to achieve this, but also we need to take into consideration the time we have for the design process. So there might be cases where we have to think about, for example, what is essential to have solved. So we do as many iterations we need for specific issues, and also we can see, depending on the time we have, what is nice to have, and then we can think later that in a, for example, patch or a future release, that we can improve this for the players.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The next question is about different possible ways to display information in the UI. So what would be another possibility to display an information that might be more interesting or interactive when you are having a text paragraph popping up that you can barely read until it disappears again? So are there any other options to have this hint section, like look out for that or something like that? What can you do?
So let me see if I understand. They want to make sure we present a hint to in the in-game to the players in a way that is not boring or
Yes, kind of. I think you touched upon this briefly
Yeah.
in the presentation as well, when you were saying that instead of like you could use icons or different colors or.
Yeah, so it depends what information you have to present to players, but you can also make it juicy. You can think, okay, how it animates. Does it feel nice? You want to find a balance between communicating, because the actual goal of creating the design of the UI is to make sure the information is effective for players. But also you can look at how it can be presented in a way that feels nice. So animation could be a way of making sure this information feels nice. You can add sound to it. But yeah, it depends on the type of game and the type of information you're displaying. And also, sometimes you don't have, to present this information for a lot of time. So you have to decide whether it is really important to invest more time in polishing how this information is presented, because there might be more important aspects of the UI for players.
Okay, thank you. Are there some things that you know now as a UI designer that you wish that you knew before, like maybe when you were starting or starting?
Yeah, of course. I think you can always learn new things, because you always encounter different challenges, and sometimes you might be used to designing things for in a certain way, but then with newer challenges, you'll have to find new solutions. So something that I've learned in my experience, I think it's something I wasn't aware when I started working in UI for games, is that localization is a big issue. So you want to make sure the UI is looking as intended, not only for the default language you're presenting the UI. For example, if it's in English, you'll have, let's say, like shorter text than in German, where you can maybe like double the amount of text presented to players. So for this, we have to make sure we can test in different languages the information we can fit in a script, or at least to support like text boxes that can have like more amount of characters in them. And then when the implementation comes, we're going to continue testing to see, okay, are there any edge cases like that are breaking the UI because of unintended overlaps, or maybe the text is cropped. So this is like an ongoing thing we have to pay attention to, because we want to make sure the game looks nice for players in different languages.
Okay. Do you have a strict color scheme when working, or is it a more creative process without strict rules?
So, yeah. So as I mentioned in Rainbow, when we have a style guide, and this style guide already indicates the use of specific colors. So we know, for example, what is the color for different types of currency. We know what are the colors that are used for the rarity of different items in the game, but we also know we use cyan and blue for highlights, etc. So we already know that these colors shouldn't be used in different ways, because it's going to be confusing for players. So we have to think, if we really need a different color that is not part of the style guide, we need to see how it works together with the existing elements that we already have in the game. Or we can see, okay, let's the color is really not important here, and we can just get like a neutral color or something, because this information can be conveyed in a different way.
Okay, thank you. So when you release a feature, are you fully done with it? Or did it happen to you that it didn't get accepted after release and you had to come back to it?
After release?
Yeah.
No, if it's released, it was accepted. But before release, yeah, there are features that might not be approved, and some games are canceled without being released. Some features are canceled without being released, and but there might be also the case where we release something partially, and then we can continue creating updates to add the additional features we wanted to have in there.
The next question is it's two parts. So, do the UX and UI designer also do the tutorials of a game? And if yes, is there a good or even a best way to do these tutorials?
So the part about how the information is going to be introduced to players is more of a UX design responsibility. So before we think about how it looks for players, UX designers can, well, at least in a AAA game, it would be their responsibility to collaborate with game designers to see what steps of the gameplay they have to teach the players and how they can break down this information for them. After we already have a plan of what we want to do, a UI designer can come and see how it looks visually in the game. So there might be, interesting visuals to show these instructions, or might be animations, or might be just, I don't know, text boxes, whatever. But the visual part is the responsibility of the UI designer.
Okay, thank you. The next question, what about UI on guns or other in-game objects? In what stage of development this work must be done? What is the process of developing the item's UI?
So when the UI is placed in the game world, I mean, so if this is something that is identified as a priority in design, it will be prototype at least early on. I think the first step is to know, for example, if we have a building game, we might already know that we need a grid. So in this case, the UX designer, when they think about the experience, they're gonna already see, okay, how we want to convey the information the players need. For example, we need a grid to make sure players know how to where they can build, and then might be that some of these things that are in the game space are also like touching a little bit with technical art. So this might be like maybe like a UI artist can make a concept, but it can go directly to a UI tech artist, and they can already look in the engine at what they can do and start like prototyping ideas for that. So it really depends how big of a priority this is. We can make a concept, but some of these things need shaders, another engine, like programming, and they have some requirements in the engine, and they require programming. So it might be that the final look of this is not achieved by a UI designer, but a programmer or a technical artist are doing this.
Okay, thank you. The next question, have you faced tasks or challenges that were difficult?
Yes. I mean, as I mentioned, like having a new challenge always has a learning curve. Like the first time you encounter an issue, you have to gather information. Okay, like what do we have to do, and then okay, how can we do this? So that's why we have to do research. We have to gather ideas, and then we can start like planning how we can do that. But there's always like something new, and that's also fun to have different things we are learning in the process.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, from your point of view, how do the in-house engines that we use square up against what you are or what you learn in school or in the courses at university? When you started at Ubisoft, was it like learning something brand new, or was it quite easy to adapt to our in-house engines?
So I think having already experienced prototyping in university helped me to understand how how is the pipeline of working with an engine. So a lot of things you can translate when you start learning these in-house tools. But also, it's not expected for people, like to come fresh from even from another company or another project. And it's expected that they won't have any experience with private tools. So there's always an onboarding process when you join. You join a team, and in this onboarding process, you're gonna have time to get familiar with the engine that we're using.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, how do you know that your UI actually works for the players? So what checks and tests do you use?
So when we have the low fidelity design phase, we can do user test. So in here, UX designers or UX researchers are gonna test, for example, wireframes or UX prototypes to test, for example, the navigation of the screen, or if when given like a task to the players, if they're able to complete this task. Apart from user test, we always like test internally, like among our colleagues. Not only the people responsible for designing something, but we also tend to show them to people that don't have any context to see how they interact with it internally in the team, as well as when we do the implementation in the engine, we do playtest, and then we can see how our designs are working in the game, and if we encounter any issues, if our teammates are encountering any issues. But in Rainbow, we have the possibility of also having tracking data, which let us know, for example, if players are not spending a lot of time in a screen, it might be because there's an issue, or also make sure with the tracking data if the goals that we set up are being accomplished by the players in real life in the game.
Okay, thank you. And maybe the next question to be our last question is: do you take inspiration from other games?
Yeah, of course. So I would say that it's really important to look at what similar games are doing, just in general, to know what players are expecting. But also, like, visually, it's like some games are really exciting and how they present their user interfaces. And you can, for example, look at websites like Interfacing Game or Game UI Database, and then you can find a lot of screen captures of different games, and you can sort them by specific menus. You can sort them by the type of game. You can sort them by different filters. So if you're interested to look at inspiration from different UI interfaces, I recommend those pages. But in general, you can also get the inspiration from real life. So might be that you see at real life materials and you want to see to show a UI that is using like these materials as inspiration, or you can see, for example, books, and I want a UI that has the details that we might encounter in a book. So you can find inspiration as well places in real life and not only in other games.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, thank you, Sylvia. Thank you very much for the presentation, for answering all the questions. Thanks everyone for watching and attending this stream. We have reached the end, and I also want to thank Julia for the streaming magic, Stefan and Sarah for moderating the chat, and Stefan for helping a lot with the organization. And with that, I wish you a great rest of the day, a great rest of the year, actually, a happy holiday season, and a good start into 2025.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.